Episode 51, Battle on Pilo Island. Luigi leapt into the air, grabbing onto the cool mossy rock. Straining his muscles, he hauled himself upward as on the hill below, his companions milled around, each one alert and ready for battle. Luigi and the others had sped through Somnom Woods, dodging the toxic ponds and navigating the thick underbrush. As they had ran, Cobal had filled him in about the owner of the silver ship. A Kremling who went by the title Silver Star, who could summon swords out of thin air. He didn't sound like the kind of guy Luigi would relish fighting. And by the look of the two ships accompanying his, he had brought friends. If Luigi had known he'd be getting into this much trouble, he would have brought more people with him. They had made it to the tall stone hills that rose like humongous pillars over the forest. Mist hung around Luigi as he gazed around his surroundings, poofy dark trees below him like an endless sea of trees. There was no way of knowing how close their enemies were. Daisy leapt up the cliff and hauled herself over towards Luigi.
"How much longer until we reach the temple?"
she said, looking up at the further hills which rose up even higher, their sides as smooth as a man-made wall.
"Maybe halfway there,"
Luigi replied, trying to remember the last time he had been here with his brother, Dreambert, and Starlo. Daisy sighed and tightened her fist, looking back the way they had come. She could see nothing but swirling white fog.
"We won't make it in time,"
she said grimly.
"Even if we reach the Zkeeper's temple before they catch up, they'll be onto us while you're reasoning with him."
Wario hauled himself up, grinning wickedly.
"Let them come."
The portly thief laughed.
"I'm in the mood for a good fight." "Yeah!"
Waluigi exclaimed, leaping up next to his brother.
"Good."
Luigi nodded, before looking back up the tall cliff, dotted with small ledges.
"Then let's keep moving."
Snadlash and his entourage moved through the forest like ghosts, their silver uniforms blending in with the fog. The Silver Star brushed aside a thick bush with his black claw, his black boots moving past a bubbling pond of toxic purple water. He had brought nearly 500 soldiers with him. There was no time to take chances. He had been embarrassed once already. Once he destroyed these interlopers, the ones who threatened the Grand Star's plan, nobody would doubt he deserved to be on the council. The Grand Star's respect for him would grow. And so would his power and influence. Besides, he'd have the honor of defeating one of the Mario brothers. Even if it was the lesser-known one. Right now, his troops were engaging Luigi's forces in Wakeport. The enemy would be overwhelmed soon. As for Luigi, he was running out of time. The air was cool on Luigi's skin as he leapt across a gap towards another rock ledge. He was now high above the forest, and yet the shrine of the Zkeeper still seemed far above him. With Daisy and Cobal close behind him, Luigi dashed over the pale green grass, leaping towards yet another ledge.
"Master Luigi!"
A paratroopa flew past him, a frightened look on his face. This Koopa was a resistance member. There were many Koopas in the Mushroom Kingdom who had no loyalty to Bowser, after all.
"The enemy is gaining on us fast. They've already started climbing the cliffs."
Luigi grit his teeth. These enemies were efficient. By the time he reached the Zkeeper's temple, they'd be on them. There was no way he could contact the Zkeeper in the middle of a fight.
"Luigi,"
Daisy said, putting her hand on his shoulder.
"Leave it to me."
"Huh?" Luigi turned around to stare at her.
"Yeah. Let me pulverize them."
Wario chuckled. Luigi felt nervous. He didn't want Daisy to leap into danger. He had already lost his brother. He didn't want to lose his love, too. But he needed to have faith in Daisy. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She had fighting skills that would make most people jealous.
"Thank you, Daisy, Wario, Waluigi,"
he said, before pulling Daisy into a hug.
Stay safe, okay? Hey, no need to worry about me.
She laughed.
I'll be back in a minute. Count me in too.
Cobal shouted, leaping up onto the ledge.
You think I'm going to let these guys catch up to you, L?
Luigi looked from Daisy to Cobal. He quickly put together a plan.
No, don't do that,
he said to Cobal quickly.
You and Prince Peasley and your other friends. They stay with me. Daisy, Wario, Waluigi, go slow down our enemies.
When Cobal looked to protest, Luigi added,
I need someone to defend me while I'm contacting the Zkeeper. I trust you to do it, Cobal.
Cobal looked a bit disappointed, but he nodded.
Yeah, whatever you say, Luigi. Then let's crush these bad boys.
Wario growled. Snadlash's black boot came down upon a flower, crushing it to the ground as the 7-star strike force moved through the forest. They'd be upon the cliff soon, Snadlash thought. Then they'd be dealt with swiftly and severely. There was a rustle of leaves ahead of them. Several people, were coming towards them. Snadlash snarled and summoned a sword into his right hand, gripping it tightly.
Prepare yourself,
he hissed to his men. Daisy burst out of the bushes, an orange fireball against the forest's dark green. Behind her were more people. Wario and Waluigi, and an assortment of Toads, Koopas, and more, all charging towards them.
Kill them!
Snadlash sneered. A duo of 7-stars Koopas dashed at Daisy, but she batted them away with a powerful martial arts chop. Wario leapt through the air, crashing down on a group of 7-stars Toads and Goombas, scattering them and shaking the forest floor. Snadlash growled and summoned a sword into his left hand, hurling it like a javelin at Wario. Only for Waluigi to leap up and grab it, before spinning around wildly towards another ground of 7-stars troops. Snadlash suddenly turned around to see Daisy rushing towards him. He slashed at her with his sword, but she leapt over the shining blade, aiming a jab at his face. Snadlash ducked under the jab and summoned his second sword, striking Daisy in the side with the bottom of the handle, causing her to cry out and aim a punch into Snadlash's chest. The Kremling felt a great force slam into him and he went flying, crashing into a tree trunk. Around him, he could see his troops and the resistance troops locked in battle.
I don't have time for this,
he hissed, as Daisy ran towards him, a hard look on her face. He put his boot on the trunk of the tree and leapt over the Princess of Sarasaland, landing behind her.
Destroy her,
he barked. Paragoombas wearing silver 7-stars visors flew down from the sky, swarming her. Daisy angrily punched one out of the sky. But Snadlash was already away. His soldiers could take care of these people, he thought as he ran through the forest, the cliff looming before him. He'd handle Luigi himself. Sweating, Luigi stood before the shrine to the Zkeeper. The Ultabed shimmered before him, untouched by the passage of time aside from the moss that grew over its silvery wood. He felt little triumph, however. Daisy was risking her life fighting their pursuers. He needed to get this over with, and fast.
We're finally here.
Dreambird sighed with relief.
Luigi, the Z-Keeper can be reasoned with. He helped us against Phantasma before, and the threat that the Koopa Empire poses is even greater than his was. I can assure you, he will bring back the Dream Stone. Good.
Luigi nodded, walking towards the bed.
Then, Luigi.
Prince Peasley's voice rang through the air.
They're here.
Luigi spun around. There, striding towards him, was a Kremling with scales of the purest black. He wore a trench coat of silver, and in his right hand he clasped a curved sword.
A pleasure to meet you at last, Luigi,
he said, smiling and baring his pointed teeth.
I am the Silver Star, although I will permit you to use my real name, Snadlash. I'm afraid your long journey ends here. Fancy meeting you again, Silver Star.
Cobal laughed, balling his hands into fists.
How's your ship?
Snadlash growled and summoned his second sword.
I haven't forgotten how you humiliated me that day off the coast of Isle Delfino, Yoshi.
He grinned evilly.
I held back then, but I won't now. The gap between us, good friend, isn't something that can be bridged in one day.
With puffs of silvery magic runes, 6 more swords appeared, hovering next to Snadlash with 3 on each side.
I have mastered this unique fighting style under the tuition of the Grand Star himself,
Snadlash said, getting into a fighting pose.
For a bunch of no-names and the lesser half of a heroic duo whose time is long over, it should be more than enough to make it easy for me.
Luigi tensed himself, focusing lightning through his fist. Could he take this Snadlash guy? Probably. But there was a problem. Snadlash had reinforcements. While they were fighting, they could be swarmed by enemies and he'd lose his chance to talk to the Z-Keeper. It would all have been for nothing.
Don't worry about this joker, Luigi,
Cobal shouted.
We'll take him. Luigi, Dreambird, go deal with the Z-Keeper,
Strike said, igniting a fireball in his hand.
We'll cover you. You talk big for a Kremling who's going up against his king.
K. Rool laughed, jabbing a claw at Snadlash.
You've never been a king of mine, K. Rool.
Snadlash sneered.
You group of idiots could barely overcome me with one sword. How will you defeat me when I'll at my full power? Quick, Luigi!
Dreambird whispered to him.
The ult to bed. Now.
Luigi nodded. Before he sprang towards the bed. Cobal, K. Rool, Strike, and Peasley leapt towards Snadlash. Dreambird transformed into his pillow form and hit the bed as Luigi fell onto it. It was good he was a heavy sleeper, and that the magic of Dreambird and the ult to bed calmed your mind and helped you fade into sleep. With the sounds of the battle receding into the distance, Luigi closed his eyes. Channeling all of Luigi's training, Cobal left over one of Snadlash's slices. The Silver Star sent one of his floating swords flying towards his head, only for the sword to be blasted away by one of Strike's fireballs. Snadlash furiously brought his other sword down upon Strike, who quickly deflected it with a blast of fire. Strike closed his eyes, focusing his flames into the shape of a blade. As Snadlash sliced at him again, Strike parried with his flame sword, both blades meeting each other with a flash of light. Snadlash pushed back Strike, before aiming a thrust with his other sword. Strike flicked his left hand, launching a fireball that struck Snadlash's sword, driving it off target and having it just narrowly miss his body. One of the Silver Star's flying blades flew towards him, but Cobal leapt into action. Running forward and extending his tongue, he grabbed the sword and drew it into his mouth, swallowing it, transforming it into an egg. Cobal hurled the egg at Snadlash, who casually sliced it in two.
Really, you can't be serious.
The Silver Star mocked.
You won't be so cocky when you've fought the king, you little fool.
K. Rool shouted, barreling into Snadlash with full force and dealing a powerful punch. Snadlash went flying, but he dug his sword into the ground, skidding and slowing his momentum so he avoided falling off the cliff.
There are no kings here.
He laughed, launching a katana at K. Rool. The Kremling king's eyes widened. Cobal's heart stopped. There was no way somebody bulky like K. Rool could dodge in time. Then Peasley left through the air, knocking Snadlash's sword away with a swipe of his rapier. It clattered the ground, and K. Rool greedily scratched it up with his claws.
Well, I've been a pirate and a scientist before, so perhaps I can be a samurai too.
He shouted, grabbing the sword in both hands and slicing down heavily on Snadlash. The Silver Star blocked K. Rool's downward slash with both his blades, crossing them together and pushing back against K. Rool. Angrily, K. Rool slammed his sword down again and again, to no avail.
He's not good enough.
Cobal realized.
The Silver Star is too much above his level.
With one quick movement, Snadlash flicked his wrist, knocking K. Rool's sword out of his hand and sending it spinning off the cliff. He then kicked the larger Kremling hard in the chest with his black boot, causing him to stumble back.
You never stood a chance,
Snadlash said in an icy voice, pulling his sword back and preparing to run K. Rool through.
No!
Cobal shouted, dashing over the pale blue grass. Peasley was faster, however.
You won't take the life of my comrade!
He exclaimed, running in and deflecting Snadlash's stab with his rapier.
On guard, Silver Star!
It was cold in the dream world, a relaxing sort of cold like the cold of a summer's evening. Luigi felt anything but relaxed, though, as he leapt from limb to limb of the branches of the Zkeeper's great tree, miles above the misty forest below him. The dream world's magic enhanced his ability to jump, so he had no need to worry about whether he'd be able to reach the next branch, but time was ticking. He sprang from the branch he was on, to another, and then another. Sunlight filtered through the pale white sky, making the white leaves sparkle. Luigi took a deep breath, bent his legs, and leapt. He crashed through leaves, grabbing onto another branch with his hands, and using it to vault up even higher. He was nearly at the top, just a few more branches.
Okay, who's making all this noise?
As Luigi reached the top of the tree, his eyes were filled with rainbow light. Snadlash and Peasley ferociously fought, the light glinting off the blades of their swords. They fought with such speed that Cobal could barely keep track of what they were doing. He wanted to join in and give his friend a hand, but he knew he'd only get in Peasley's way. He, K. Rool, and Strike stood around the two combatants, watching them intensely. Strike kept a fireball hovering above his hand, ready to launch it at any moment. The Prince of the Bean Kingdom was an excellent swordsman, but Cobal knew he was out of practice due to the many years of negligence he had lived. Snadlash, on the other hand, was larger, stronger, and certainly not lacking in skill. Peasley was being overwhelmed by the Silver Star's twin katanas, and it was taking all his skill with the blade to keep his green skin from being slashed. Snadlash lashed out with his foot again, knocking Peasley down. Strike hurled his fireball, distracting Snadlash enough to save Peasley's life, although the fireball was easily deflected by the Kremling's curved blade.
You've pushed me this far!
Snadlash glowered. His three remaining floating swords hovered above him, as he gripped the two katanas in his hands tightly.
But I can see you're weakening. How much longer can you keep this up? Once I'm done with you, I'll deal with your boss. That'll be the end of the Mario Brothers legacy. I'm tired of this joker, let's crush him.
K. Rool shouted.
No!
Peasley exclaimed.
Can't you see, K. Rool? If we go in without a plan, we're finished.
Cobal tensed himself. Snadlash was walking towards him slowly. The pale sunlight shone on his sharp curved blades. He needed a plan. He thought back to every fight he had witnessed, every victory. The thought of Koop's attack that had finished Larry Koopa flashed through his mind. A shell spin, rocketed towards the more powerful opponent at a very high velocity. A Koopa shell wasn't too different from a Yoshi egg, was it? But he wasn't strong enough to launch his egg with that much force. Unless...
I got a plan!
Cobal shouted out.
K. Rool, Peasley, take him!
He leapt into the air, flutter jumping over Snadlash just as the Kremling came down upon him.
Couldn't have heard a better idea.
K. Rool rumbled, rushing at Snadlash with fist raised. The Zookeeper lazily slouched on the top of the tree, resting on the leaves as if they were a fluffy cushion. Luigi stood on a branch, glaring at him.
Dude, I thought I was going to get a few thousand years of sleep like last time.
The large, colorful bird yawned.
And now you tell me that Bowser idiot's actually gone and taken over the world this time? Come on, I thought you beat him. He's very persistent,
Luigi admitted.
Zookeeper, if the Koopa Empire is allowed to continue, they'll destroy all of Pylo Island. The whole Pylo culture will vanish. They might even go into the dream world to deal with you, since you might be a threat to their power.
The Zookeeper propped his head up with one wing and stared at Luigi very hard with his black eyes.
Huh?
He grunted. King K. Rool managed to land a punch of Snadlash, causing the Black Kremling to stumble back, but the Silver Star quickly recovered, sending one of his floating swords flying towards K. Rool's head. Just before the sharp blade could pierce his skull, Peasley leapt onto K. Rool's shoulders, batting the katana away with his rapier. Snadlash snarled and leapt at the two, slashing at K. Rool's chest with one sword and Peasley's legs with the other. Peasley just managed to deflect the attack aimed at him, but K. Rool wasn't so lucky. The sword sliced at his chest, causing him to cry out and stumbled back. Cobal knew he had to act fast. There were two floating katanas left, one hovering over each of Snadlash's shoulders. Cobal ran towards the Kremling and stuck out his tongue, drawing the sword into his mouth and transforming it into an egg. Snadlash ran at K. Rool, closing in for the kill.
You can still turn back.
The voice of the strange woman spoke softly in Cobal's ear.
Stop this, and save yourself. Walk away from this fight.
Cobal hurled the egg.
Now, strike!
He shouted, as Snadlash pulled his arm back to stab his shining blade into the Kremling King's heart. Strike charged up a red-hot fireball and hurled it as Cobal's egg, which was flying towards Snadlash. The fireball struck the egg and exploded, launching it like a rocket towards the Silver Star. Snadlash turned, his eyes wide. But it was too late. The fiery egg struck Snadlash with a force that rustled the trees around them. Snadlash was launched through the air as if he had been struck by a bonsai bill, hurtling off the cliff with a shriek. There was the sound of branches snapping, then a crash, then silence.
That's what you get for messin' with the king.
K. Rool gasped out, clearly in pain from his wound.
Are you all right?
Peasley asked, glancing at the red slice.
You're looking at a guy who's gotten blow up multiple times, so yeah, I'm all right.
K-Rool laughed. Cobal walked over to the edge of the cliff and peered down. He could see nothing beneath the leafy canopy below.
I did it,
he said aloud. Something about it felt satisfying. When he had first fought the Silver Star, he had been completely outmatched, but now, he had come out victorious. It was good to see how far he had come. Strike walked over towards him, crossing his arms.
Cobal, I'm concerned,
he said, joining him in looking down the cliff where Snadlash had disappeared.
This is the second time we've encountered 7 stars. If they've got an interest in us, they have to be much more than an ordinary crime syndicate. They might even have something to do with the war.
Cobal nodded. Yeah. There was no way Snadlash could be acting alone. Something was going on, and they didn't need it. They had enough trouble fighting both the Neo and Koopa empires. As Cobal pondered the thought, hoping to all the stars that more trouble wasn't on the way, the entire Pylo shrine became shrouded in warm rainbow-colored light. Cobal turned, his shades barely protecting him from the radiant glow, and stared in awe at the rotund bird covered in multicolored feathers rising up into the air, Luigi and Dream Bird rising up on his back.
I have awoken,
the Zkeeper exclaimed dramatically.
So, who do you want me to shoot?
His body full of bruises and aches, Snadlash dragged himself up from the pile of broken branches on the forest floor and scowled into the sky, which was partially obscured by the thick canopy of leaves. He had been humiliated for the last time. Snadlash pressed a button on his wrist. Oh yes. They were going to regret messing with him. The Silver Star saw blue light obscure his vision, and felt a feeling like a cold wind. His teleportation device was online. Angrily, Snadlash stepped onto the bridge of his warship, gazing out at island through the panoramic window.
Activate the blast-o-matic,
he exclaimed to the crew in the control area below him.
I want this island vaporized.
He slid into the command seat, clenching his fist as the crew pressed buttons on the silver touchscreen control panels. A holographic targeting sight appeared on the window, locking onto the center of the island. It flashed red. Snadlash narrowed his eyes. In just a short moment, Pylo Island and Luigi would be no more. Luigi felt the wind blowing at his hair as the Zkeeper rose higher and higher into the air, way above Somnom Woods until they were above even the snow-capped peak of Mount Pajamaja. Before them sprawled the entire island. The huge silver 7 Stars ship hovered over the water, with the 2 smaller 4 rotated ones flanking it. Luigi felt a triumphant feeling in his heart. When he had last gripped these feathers, he had been soaring with Mario towards the flying Neo Bowser's castle, ready to take on Bowser and his ally the Dream Wraith Phantasma and end their plans for world domination for good. He had done it. The Zkeeper had agreed to help them. The Dreamstone was as good as repaired, and once it was in his hands, they'd finally make their move on Koopa Central. Bowser's long reign over the world was nearing its end.
So, what do you want me to do first?
The Zkeeper asked as he soared above the clouds, allowing Luigi to see the ocean panning out to the horizon.
Remake Dreamstone, or shoot bad guys? Bad guys,
Luigi and Dream Bird said in unison.
Alrighty, one wake beam, coming right up.
The Zkeeper hovered until he was directly parallel to the huge silver battleship. A blinding, rainbow-colored light began to charge on his eyes, filling the sky.
What is this?
Snadlash exclaimed, leaning forward on his chair.
Quick, fire the blast-o-matic now! Still charging, sir.
A toad replied. Snadlash stood up. He couldn't afford to lose this. He couldn't. Was he going to explain this second failure to the board of directors? He just needed a few more seconds, just a few more. The rainbow light filled the window, blinding his eyes.
There's an incredibly powerful attack coming, sir.
A shy guy exclaimed.
As powerful as our blast-o-matic. Maybe even stronger. What about the shields?
Snadlash shouted, spittle flying from his mouth.
No good, Silver Star.
A Koopa replied.
This ship wasn't built to withstand an attack of this magnitude. 6 seconds until impact, sir.
A shy guy shouted. Snadlash spat, grinding his teeth together.
Abandon ship.
He spat, before turning around and running in the direction of the exit. The escape pods were within reach. He'd survive, and have his revenge on that miserable blue Yoshi. Luigi watched as the wake beam struck the silver ship, crashing through it and blowing it to bits in a conflagration of fire, bits of metallic debris falling to splash down into the ocean below. The Zkeeper swept the beam left and right, slicing through the other two ships so they fell burning to join the wreckage of the other. Luigi stood up on the bird's downy back, watching the last of the debris splash into the water. Against all odds, they had come out victorious. Thankfully, the battleship Luigi and the others had used to reach Pylo Island had not been destroyed. The 7 Stars troops had seemed more concerned with taking out than blowing up their means of transport. Luigi, Dreambert, Cobal, Peasley, K. Rool, who wore a large bandage over his chest, Daisy and the Wario Bros stood near the boarding ramp, watching as the Zkeeper closed his eyes.
Don't make me regret this,
the giant bird warned.
I let this funky rock stay destroyed for a reason.
Clapping his wings together, the Zkeeper summoned a ball of light. Minuscule particles were drawn to it, tiny sparkling grains of sand joining together in the shape of a pale, rainbow-colored spiral. Luigi's eyes widened in awe. It had been years since he had seen the magical stone and he had forgotten how beautiful it was.
So that's the thing that can grant any wish, huh?
Daisy asked, eyeing it closely.
That's a lot of power to hold in your hand.
Luigi nodded, taking the smooth, shiny stone from where it hung in the air. He felt nervous holding it. What if he dropped it? What if he somehow accidentally activated its power and blew everything up?
Just saying, it'll need a few nights' worth of good dreams to get it all charged up,
the Zkeeper stated as he flew up into the air. Lazy as always, the Zkeeper was going to return to the dream world to doze. He did promise to come help later if he felt like it. Luigi was disappointed the Zkeeper wouldn't help more, although he knew he shouldn't have expected much from the Zkeeper.
It's just a pretty hunk of stone right now. Don't worry.
Daisy laughed.
I think you'll be seeing a lot of good dreams now.
The escape pod door hissed as Snadlash climbed out. He had just barely managed to escape before his ship had exploded. Thankfully, he had been picked up by another 7 Stars ship soon after. Had his progress been observed all this time? He grit his teeth as he stepped into the hangar bay, which was cold and smelled of fuel. The vast, mostly empty hangar was bathed in a menacing red light. Snadlash shook himself out as a long shadow fell over him.
Bravo, bravo, Silver Star!
Came Skull's voice as he walked into view, softly clapping. The sound of the claps echoed around Snadlash, making him feel on edge. He looked around himself. There were troops dressed in red uniforms positioned around the hangar. He was surrounded.
"Purple Star,"
Snadlash said respectfully, kneeling.
"Forgive me. I didn't anticipate the Zkeeper to get involved. If I'd had just another minute, I would have incinerated Pylo Island and put an end to this whole business."
"Ah,
but you didn't, did you?"
Skulls said, with a wry smile.
"If you had managed to defeat your enemies in hand-to-hand combat, the Zkeeper never would have been released in the first place. And now the Dreamstone is in our enemies' hands. The Grand Star is not pleased with you, Snadlash. Tell the Grand Star I will personally eliminate his enemies."
Snadlash replied, bowing his head. His heart was beating. The Purple Star always made him nervous.
"Rest assured." "No, Snadlash,"
Skulls replied coldly.
"You failed us for the last time."
Suddenly Snadlash felt something tight grip his body and he was lifted up into the air. He looked down to see Snadlash smiling at him, his left hand raised into the air and his left eye glowing orange. Suddenly, the eye flashed blood red. Beams of light burst out of Snadlash's body as the silver star screamed with pain, glowing like a star. Until Skulls clenched his fist. There was a flash of light. And Snadlash was gone, vaporized into nothingness. The troops positioned around the hangar didn't react. They had all known what was about to happen. Skulls fastidiously rubbed his hands together.
"Come out, Red Star,"
he said, without looking at whom he was speaking to. Footsteps echoed through the hangar as someone approached. His blue eyes a blank stare, Mario looked up at Skulls.
"Now,"
Skulls said, turning around to fix Mario with a warm smile.
"Let's see if you can correct Snadlash's mistake. Kill Luigi."
Mario's blue eyes betrayed no emotion. The hero of the Mushroom Kingdom was dead. There was only the Red Star, the weapon in the Grand Star's hand and the slayer of his enemies. The sun was setting over the sea, dyeing the sky a majestic red. Luigi and Daisy stood at the front of the ship, hand in hand, watching the sun disappear behind the horizon as the ship rumbled through the sky, headed for Princess Peach's new war camp in the Bean Bean Kingdom.
"I can't believe this is almost over,"
Luigi spoke, clutching the prince's hand tightly. Daisy laughed.
"We've been through a lot."
She laughed.
"I watched Ludwig von Koopa destroy my city and you... well, you've been crushing Koopas all over the world."
"Yeah." Luigi nodded, turning to look at her.
"We still have Bowser to deal with, though. He won't be easy." "No. But you've always dealt with him before,"
Daisy replied, comfortingly.
"Bowser, Ludwig, weird Kremlings with swords. You're Super Luigi. Besides, we're all here to help. When this is all over."
Luigi didn't know what he was going to say to Daisy. Maybe he would have even asked her to marry him, something he'd be planning to do from the moment she had shown up bruised and dirt-covered at the gates of Toad Town. But he was cut short by the frightened voice of a toad, rushing out of the door towards the front of the ship, nearly crashing into the Bill Blaster turret on the way.
L. Luigi. We're being followed. There's another ship. Another one.
Daisy exclaimed, letting go of Luigi's hands.
This is serious.
Luigi's heart began to beat. They had come this far, so there was no way they were going to back down now.
Daisy, tell the crew to get the Bill blasters ready. Then we can join Cobalt and the others, and take out enemies just like my bro would have done. That's the problem, Luigi,
the Toad said. His voice sounded terrified, haunted, and confused all at once, as if he had seen a kind of ghost that was a lot more frightening than an ordinary boo.
There's someone standing on the enemy ship. I think it's Mario.